Hi there, thanks for joining us. We're just a couple minutes before we're going to get started. If you want, it'd be great to let us know where you're coming from today and just type that into the chat box. You'll see that at the bottom of the screen. Toronto, me too. Don't be shy, people. Let's hear where you're from. India, Toronto, Australia. Montreal, Germany, New York, Germany, the UK, Alberta, Ottawa, London, Honduras, Amsterdam, the Netherlands, Ottawa, London, Costa Rica, oh, but based in Toronto, New York, India. Wonderful. So we'll just give it another minute as everybody's just filing in right now. If you're just joining us, we're asking people to let us know in the chat function where you're coming from today. Montreal, Nashville, Edmonton, London, Minneapolis, Connecticut, another Australia, Turkey. Awesome. Denmark, Mumbai. Hey, Ellen. Okay, so people will just give it another minute. Looks like the we think it's terrific too, Ellen. Thanks for joining us. Sweden. Awesome. If you're just joining us now, feel free to let us know where you're joining us from in the chat function. Okay. All right, the numbers are still coming, but just to be mindful of everybody's time, I'd like to get started. So welcome to the second installment of our free monthly WEAR webinar series. I'm Kelly Drennan, the founder of Fashion Takes Action, a nonprofit organization based in Toronto, Canada, devoted to advancing sustainability in the fashion industry since 2007. And I'm so glad that you've joined us today for 3 very engaging sessions. This month, our focus is on the materials revolution as it relates to the industry's contribution to climate change, how sourcing sustainable fabrics drives real change, and what are the latest technologies and innovations that are happening on a global level. But first, I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge the land I am on today. Toronto is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is built on sacred land that is part of an agreement between Indigenous peoples and allied nations to peacefully and respectfully care for it. The colonial structures used to once settle this land are the same systems that support the exploitation of resources and people in the global fashion industry today. Okay, so just a couple matters of business before we get going. We will have time at the end of the panel for your questions. So please, throughout the session, feel free to ask any questions that you have in the Q&A button at the bottom, and just use the chat function only for comments. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A. We've also turned on the voting for questions. So if you do see a question that you also wanted to answer or ask, simply like it and it will be bumped up to the top of the list. Today's panel discussion is on a very timely topic, as there is an urgent need of the fashion industry to address its impact on climate. McKinsey research shows that the sector was responsible for some 2.1 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions in 2018, about 4% of the global total. To set that in context, the fashion industry emits about the same quantity of GHGs a year as the entire economies of France, Germany, and the UK combined. Despite efforts to reduce emissions, the industry is on a trajectory that will exceed the 1.5-degree pathway to mitigate climate change set out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and ratified in the 2015 Paris Agreement. To reach this pathway, fashion would need to cut its GHG emissions to 1.1 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. But growth calculations show the industry is set to overshoot its targets by almost twofold, with emissions of 2.1 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent in 2030, unless it adopts additional reduction actions. Our panel of experts today will provide their unique perspectives on the decarbonization of the fashion industry with a focus on raw materials. You'll learn how GHG emissions are calculated and compared across different fibers, tencel, recycled polyester, and cotton, and how we must continue to innovate, regenerate, and develop circular solutions. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for this month. Thank you to Lenzing and to Kendor Textiles and to Eco Textile News. Without their support, we could not offer these to you for free. And we thank you for showing up, because without you, well, we wouldn't have sponsors. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's Rockstar panel. Jasmine Malik-Chua is a well-known sustainable fashion journalist whose work can be found in Vox, the New York Times, Vogue, The Business of Fashion, and Sourcing Journal. In fact, Jasmine and I actually go way back to, I think, 2007 when I first started Fashion Takes Action, and she was writing for Ecoterre. So I'm really happy to be partnering with you today on this important discussion. And so, yeah, let's hand it over right now. I'll turn off my video and you can take it away, Jasmine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm so pleased to be here and to be moderating this amazing panel. So we will be going through our four speakers today, and we'll start with Trisha Carey of Lenzing, who will be showing us some wonderful slides.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that introduction, Kelly. It's wonderful to be able to work together on this. I know we've talked about some of our challenges that we face as an industry, and I'm happy that we can highlight what we're doing at Lenzing, as well as what other fiber companies are doing and what Textile Exchange is supporting around climate action. So for Lenzing, what I would like to do is first give you an overview of what we see as the challenges today in the market, and then we'll dive deeper into what Lenzing is presenting. And afterwards, I look forward to answering your questions in the Q&A. If you could go to the next slide, please. The basis for what we're dealing with, and I think what the apparel industry, what we're looking at, is the framework set by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These were set in 2015, and these were goals to be the guideline for companies throughout all different industries until 2030. For Lenzing, we've been highlighting the Sustainable Development Goals in our annual sustainability report for more than 3 years. And we've really been working towards developing our initiatives and strategies related to the Sustainable Development Targets. So I think, you know, when we started talking about where is the industry going and what can we do to impact, we saw many customers looking at water, waste, chemicals. And now we see much more interest around SDG 13, which is climate action. This ties closely together with SDG 7. And I think, you know, if you tie this together in a bundle, then you have to include SDG 17 partnerships for the goals, which is, this is the only way that we're going to be able to achieve and really move the needle is if we collaborate within the industry. If you could go to the next slide. Around carbon, I'm sorry, you just, scroll down to the next slide. Around carbon, we look at some of the issues and support that we have. And in 2018, Lenzing was a signatory of the UNFCCC. This is the Fashion Charter for Climate Action, for climate change. And there were, with the group of companies that signed the UNFCCC, this is where the goal was set at 30% CO2 reduction by 2030. Lenzing actually set goals to go even further than that and to have a 50% reduction in carbon by 2030. Then in 2019, Lenzing had approved science-based targets. And I think, we're all trying to understand around climate action. It's a whole new language. We're not scientists, we're in marketing and business development. So as we learn together about how to tackle this challenge, have the common language, there are organizations like Science Based Targets to support us in that. And I encourage you to take a look at the Science Based Target website. There are over 1,000 companies now that are taking action. There are about 529 who have approved science-based targets. And so Lenzing is one of those 529 companies that actually has approved targets. And this is where, we're using then science to measure what change we want to make. You can go to the next slide. One of the areas, and yeah, you can just click through that. The areas that we see and understanding this terminology is that we have to look at the different ways that we have carbon impact. And we look at our direct emissions, which is known as Scope 1. And here this is laid out for you around the manufacturing, transportation, and energy use. Scope 2, if you could click through again, is the indirect emissions. And Scope 3, if you click one more time, then you can see the impact. There's a variety of different reports that are out there. Reports from Qantas are, highlighting just how much impact comes from Scope 3. For Lenzing, we really looked to see what we could do to impact our Scope 1, 2, and 3 across the board, and found that we were already doing many good things to reduce our carbon outputs around Scope 1, which I'll explain further. But, and understanding CO2, take a look at Scope 1, 2, and 3 and where these impacts are coming from. If you can go to the next slide, what's most important is where you can reduce. So it's all about reduction. And for Lenzing, this is where we looked at what we were doing in our fiber production at our integrated site in Lenzing, Austria, where we make our tensile lyocell as well as our tensile modal. And here we already had integrated systems that we are making the pulp as well as the fiber in one plant. And we were using a large amount of renewable energy, which was reducing our impact substantially. The second step we looked at is where we could engage in the industry within our suppliers that we could support reductions. And we also need to engage further down, working with retailers and brands and how we can support them in reducing the overall impact of their products. And the third area that we looked at is offsets. And we'll talk about this more later, but it's also very confusing. Offsets, insets, where does all of this come from? I think these are the questions that you need to ask when you're looking around carbon is what is being offset, how much is being offset, and which offsets are being supported. So if you can go to the next slide. This slide is really showing a high level of transparency from Lenzing in what we're doing here. And what we did was we took the information of a generic lyocell that's in the market and what the carbon impact is. When we take out the areas that we are already showing superior reductions, especially around the energy mix and efficiency in production, as well as cleaner pulp, we already have a low footprint for our tensile lyocell. So you can see here we get down to 2.32. And this is before any offsetting. And then we actually do look at any kind of external reduction actions that are required so that we can provide a certified carbon neutral fiber. So this is what we can provide with the offsets. We work with natural capital partners, and we can provide this certified tensile lyocell or certified tensile modal fibers in order to reduce your impacts. We launched this last month during New York City Climate Week, and we've been working with our brand and retail partners to help them understand what this product is, as well as they are addressing their total carbon footprint. On the next slide, I want to highlight what offset programs we are working with. And this, I think, is a great way of bringing in some social aspects, working with the improved cook stoves in Bangladesh. We also are working with solar heating initiatives in India and landfill gas to energy in Thailand. So I think these offset programs are very important as we look globally on how we can reduce our impact and support going back to the SDGs in order to have climate action SDG 13. So that is a little bit about Lenzing and our true carbon zero tensile lyocell and tensile modal fibers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tricia. So next up, we have Jay Herdwig from Unify. Jay, on to you.
All right, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here today, participating and on a panel with a lot of great people. And everyone on this panel is doing something, making products, making an effort to really do something for the good of tomorrow. And we're really excited about the opportunity to share information and collaborate as we all try to make the world a better place through our products that go through the fashion industry. So a little bit about Unify, in case you're unfamiliar with Unify. We are a public company based out of the United States in North Carolina, but we have manufacturing and sales operations around the world, including Central America, South America, Europe, Turkey, and Asia. We've got about 2,700 employees globally, and we are a little over a $600 million company, but we are known globally for manufacturing, product innovation, and certainly sustainability. Next slide. Some of you are familiar with our product and our brand REPREVE, which is a high quality performance fiber made from recycled materials. And many of you have seen this brand featured with a lot of the most recognizable brands and retailers around the globe. Next slide. As I mentioned, we're known for sustainability, but really transparent, traceable, and certified recycled material is the true value that we've been able to provide to the market through our U-Trust verification system, which includes our fiber print technology, as well as a variety of different third-party certifications for recycled content. And finally, pertaining to the subject matter today, one of the biggest advancements that we've seen, as Kelly alluded to in her opening comments, the industry is ahead of some of its goals. And one of the biggest contributing factors is the trend and the movement that you've seen from many brands and retailers to move away from virgin polyester or synthetic materials and utilize recycled synthetic materials. Recycled PET, post-consumer content, is probably the most popular and the most recognizable in the industry today, as well as one of the most available materials. And for the conversation piece today, certainly it does have an impact when it comes to carbon emissions when you compare that to virgin polyester. In terms of energy consumption, there's a lot of different information out there, but on average, it's about using recycled content reduces energy consumption by about 44%, reduces water consumption by about 16%, and greenhouse gas emissions by about 29%. But remember, the real opportunity here and the real driver for these savings is the polymer already exists in the form of a bottle or in the form of other synthetic waste materials. And so when you don't have to go through the petrochemical process to produce polymer, that's where you see these offsets. And that is what you are seeing happening in the market today, and has really been a big contributing factor to many of the companies that are being recognized for their commitment to the environment and many of their sustainability goals that they've set in place. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And then now I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Jay. And now we have Bruce Atherley from the Cotton Council International. Bruce?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you put up my presentation? There we go. And actually, you can go to the next slide, please. Jasmine, we'll start there. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Today, I'm just going to give you a 5-minute overview of how the U.S. cotton industry is attacking this issue of carbon and greenhouse gases. My focus is really about the new program called the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, because this is really the vehicle that's going to enable the U.S. cotton industry to eventually get to a carbon neutral position. We have the next slide, please. What is this program? This is a new program for U.S. growers that sets a new standard for more sustainable cotton production. So the Trust Protocol proves, measures, and verifies U.S. cotton's continuously improving sustainability credentials, giving brands and retailers the assurances they need that the cotton fiber element of their supply chain is more sustainably grown with lower environmental and labor risk. And it's really 3 parts to the program. Obviously, there's a lot more detail to it, but if you take away 3 things, 1, it's got standards. Growers fill out 120 questions about their growing and sustainability practices. Then there is independent verification, including on-site farm visits provided by a control union. And finally, there's data. Each grower provides data in terms of water usage, pesticide usage, herbicide usage, etc., in terms of the exact amount of products they are using for their crop. That data goes into the field print calculator from field to market, and we are going to be the only sustainability program to be able to provide this kind of data for cotton. So if you go to the next page, Tricia mentioned earlier the importance of the textile exchange, who many of you know has really led the way, I think, from a sustainability platform perspective in many respects. So the protocol has been recognized as a preferred fiber and material by the textile exchange. And that's important because they've set a goal. If you go to the next page, please, Jasmine. Their goal is to achieve a 35 to 45% reduction in CO2 emissions from textile fiber and material production by 2030. So, they recognized us because we are also focused on that goal. So if you go to the next slide, we are the only country in the world for cotton production that has set quantitative goals for continuous improvement. So we have these 5 goals. We're going to focus today on the 2, soil carbon increase of 30% and greenhouse gas reduction of 39% by 2025. We'll be setting goals for 2030 and 2050 at a latter, point, probably in the next year or so. But for now, for the purpose of this panel, I want to really focus on those 2. So if you go to the next slide, the key to carbon reduction really in the US is all about soil health. Healthy soil improves water usage, and it actually improves the yield that the grower is going to get in terms of cotton, the amount of land that's used, so efficient use of land. It increases soil carbon and reduces greenhouse gases. So from field to market, they've been tracking many crops since 1980, and U.S. cotton has already achieved a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Again, with this focus on soil health, that area in the dark green shows the reduced footprint, if you will, on the land from cotton production on a per pound of cotton. So if you go to the next page, I want to talk quickly about just the most important things that are going to go into achieving these two, critical goals. And again, 39% aligned with textile exchange for 2025, and then this 30% improvement of soil carbon. Because the whole key for us in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and getting to decarbonization is twofold. One is avoidance. You want to avoid, carbon escaping into the atmosphere. And second, sequestration. You want to keep the carbon in the ground and keep adding to that carbon. So if you go to the next page, the three ways really we're going to do it, as I mentioned earlier, the focus is really around the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, because this has got the standards and the measurement that is going to enable us to get to our goal. But we're going to ask the growers to really do a couple of things. First, a higher rate of adoption of what we call precision agriculture. Precision agriculture is the use of technology, basically, whether that's field mapping, variable rate application, and I'll show you an example of that on the next page. Higher adoption rates for things like cover crops. Cover crops, for those of you who are not familiar, are the crops that are non-cash. They're planted in the off season when cotton is not being grown, things like wheat and oats. And basically what they do is they return nutrients to the soil, and they allow that, for a very rich soil mass and a biosystem. Then the minimal and no-till means basically you're not plowing the land, because whenever you plow the land, you're obviously releasing the carbon stored in the soil. So we're focused on a 30% of our fields. We want to be 30% more of our fields to be using cover crops, minimal and no-till practices. And then finally, and Tricia alluded to this earlier, working with others to develop carbon markets, which will incentivize growers to sequester carbon in the soil. Because, at the end of the day, people do what they're incented to do. So if growers can make more money by, doing this, then they'll be incented to really focus on carbon reduction. So if you go to the next page, I'll give you a quick example of some of the technologies that our growers are using. As I mentioned earlier, field mapping. So they're using GPS satellites to map their fields. What does that do? That enables them, and again, this goes back to precision agriculture, to use the exact amount of either nutrients, pesticides, insecticides, water that's needed, and no more. So again, there's this perception that we use a lot, but the truth is the farmers make more money by using less of everything. And so this tool, field mapping, sensors, and what we call variable rate application, which basically means you use, again, the exact amount you need and no more, are really going to be the keys for us for carbon reduction and increasing our carbon efficiency. So finally, in summary, U.S. cotton industry, go to the next slide, sorry. If you go to the next slide, we're committed to significant carbon reduction with the ultimate goal, of being carbon neutral. And honestly, this is a very doable goal for the U.S. cotton industry. We're going to achieve this via measurement, precision agriculture, and continuous improvement, again, through the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. And down there is the website if you'd like to learn more about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And just a reminder, if you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And if you see a question someone has asked that you like, feel free to upvote it so it goes up in priority. And last but certainly not least, we have Sophia Oberskalski from Textile Exchange. So take it away, Sophia.
Thank you, Jasmine. It's so great to be part of today's panel, and a big shout out to Kelly and the Fashion Takes Action team for this really exciting webinar series. Textile Exchange is known as an organization that equips and inspires the textile industry to create material change and increase the uptake of preferred materials. And as climate action is so important and urgent, we recently updated our strategy to focus on climate while continuing to holistically address various key impact areas related to materials. We call this our 2030 Climate Plus strategy. Our updated vision is to guide the textile industry to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from materials by 45% by 2030 compared to a 2020 baseline. Next slide, please. The IPCC report launched in 2018 shows that global CO2 emissions must fall by 45% by 2030 compared to 2010 levels. And we will have to reach net zero emissions around 2050 to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. This is important to avoid widespread and irreversible climate effects. It also shows that rapid and far-reaching transitions are needed, and that carbon sequestration is a necessary piece for the 1.5 degrees target. Next slide, please. To estimate the greenhouse gas emissions related to global raw materials production and create a 1.5 degrees scenario, we use the following two sources: the global material volume data from our latest preferred fiber and materials market report, and the HIC MSI greenhouse gas midpoints. As you can see on the right side, 111 million metric tons of fiber were produced in 2019. The global fiber production has more than doubled in the last 20 years. Synthetic fibers have dominated the market since the mid-1990s, with polyester alone accounting for more than 50% of all fibers. Cotton is the second most important fiber in terms of volume, with a market share of approximately 23%. And man-made cellulosic fibers had a market share of around 6.4%. So for the textile industry in general, these are key fibers by volume and thus key levers for climate action. And the panelists of today's webinar nicely represent these different key materials. Next slide, please. I'm very excited to share this slide with you, as this is a very new and powerful analysis that can help the textile industry to better understand the extent and the scope of materials-related carbon strategies required to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. We have created different scenarios. On this slide, you can see one potential scenario. It assumes a substantial substitution of current materials with preferred, more sustainable options. For example, 50% of all cotton from preferred sources. I will not go into detail here, but this includes, for example, organic cotton, BCI cotton made in Africa, and as Bruce also mentioned, US Cotton Trust Protocol. And we also assumed, for example, that 50% of polyester is recycled polyester. Even if we assume substantial substitution with existing preferred solutions, there remains an innovation gap of around 197 million tons of CO2 equivalents. So to summarize, it shows that we have to set really ambitious targets and we have to close the innovation gap. Innovations required include, for example, regenerative practices, carbon sequestration, and circular solutions. Next slide, please. Material-related solutions to reduce the carbon emissions include increasing the uptake of recycled materials, such as recycled polyester or recycled cotton, for example. Proliferating regenerative practices, such as regenerative cotton production that can help to sequester carbon in the soil. Mitigating land use change, for example, deforestation and forest degradation for the production of materials, such as man-made cellulosics and leather. The transition to renewable energy is another important lever. And last but not least, innovation and circularity. To summarize, a diversity of ambitious approaches is required to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And there are already very wonderful initiatives out there to support this journey. I would like to hand back over to Jasmine now.
Thank you so much, Sophia. So I think our panelists can come back on video and mic. And so I have some predetermined questions, and then we'll try to leave about 10 minutes before the end of the hour to take some questions from the audience. So that not everyone is talking at the same time, I'll be directing my questions to one person. And then, once that person is done speaking, if our other panelists have something to add or something else they'd like to say, please feel to jump in at that point. So we hear a lot of different terms being used in the conversation. We have carbon neutral, climate positive, net zero, carbon zero. Do they mean the same thing? Which do you use to describe your efforts both internally and to clients and consumers? And should we do a better job at working together to use consistent language? Tricia, would you like to start?
Yeah, GHG, SBT, I feel like this is another alphabet soup that we're entering, and I really would like someone to come up with, carbon for dummies so that we could try to get some of this terminology down pat, because it is overwhelming. And as I said in the beginning, we're talking about this, we're not scientists, and a lot of this does get more scientific with the numbers and the measurement, which is great, and we need to have that. But when we've been presenting things like our True Carbon Zero, we're talking to designers, product developers, and a lot of this is new information for them. We've just kind of gotten over everything around water and chemicals and circularity that we're still trying to tackle together. So I think all of the language, we do need to come up and clarify some of the definitions. I think it's through discussions like this of education opportunities that are so important, and also that people know the right questions to ask. This is essential. For Lenzing, what we've been highlighting is True Carbon Zero, which is net zero. We align ourselves with the science-based targets because that we feel is the right platform to really address and bring this information together. So yes, overwhelming the definitions that we need to clarify as an industry and move forward with this. And for Lenzing, we look at net zero and overall our carbon reduction, primarily through that renewable energy use.
Great. Did anyone else want to talk about, the terms that you're using to communicate your decarbonization efforts, and, whether we do need a lexicon for the industry?
I think I just throw out one thing, which it's all about reduction, right? And continuous reduction of carbon. And that's really what it comes down to. So I think having common language would be great and definitions, but at the end of the day, if we're all focused on reduction, I think we're in the right place.
Yeah, I agree completely, especially in the synthetic world. It's all about how do we use less of our natural resources to produce some of these products that are synthetic products that we rely on every day, from in the fashion industry, from performance to comfort to stretch to everything we do, and it all comes from lower uses of natural resources, as you're alluding to, Bruce.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jay, what is your advice for brands who are looking to incorporate carbon-friendly fibers into their supply chain? What is the first thing they should know?
Well, at the end of the day, as Tricia said, it's really they've got to understand what's out there, what's available, and what are the right questions to ask. In the synthetic industry, it's been pretty easy because everyone recognizes the PET bottle, and everyone wants to make product made out of recycled material. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to your supply chain, and that's really what everyone on this panel has probably been doing work with some big brands and retailers to help them understand the supply chain, because that is where the carbonization information and material exists. And it's not just one step, it's every step that comes up with that big number and has the biggest impact when we talk about offsetting the use of natural resources or decarbonizing the textile and apparel industry.
Yeah, Trisha or Bruce or Sophia, do you have any advice for a company that's just starting out, especially maybe a smaller or medium-sized business?
Yeah, I can just add to that. Again, science-based targets, we use this as a platform. I think it's wonderful to centralize. As I mentioned, there's only 1,000 companies that are a part of that. And actually there's 26 textile apparel luxury good companies that actually have approved science-based targets, and 35 has submitted their plans, but there's only one fiber company that has approved science-based targets, and that's Lenzing, which we had approved last year. I think the centralization, being able to measure, is very important off of science. And the other thing, just to add from what Jay said, we only manufacture fiber, and if we just look at, our customers are yarn spinners, that's not going to get us there. It's how we have to look as a supply network and work together to understand. And that's where I think, from our fiber perspective and looking at raw material inputs, which is why, I felt it was important to have, cotton as well as polyester represented in this discussion, is because we all have to collaborate and work as a network to achieve a reduction.
Yeah, Jasmine, if I could add to that, I think the easiest place for a brand to start would be with the 3 companies and textile exchange, to start by selecting the textile exchange preferred fibers. And then again, I know from personal experience, Lenzing's done a terrific job. Jay, really impressed with what Unify is doing. And if you join the US Cotton Trust Protocol, we'll be able to provide you with aggregated CO2 equivalents for the cotton used in your product line. So to Trisha's point, it's all about collaboration. We're all in this together, but I think that's the best place to start, is through the textile exchange preferred fiber list.
Yes, and I think it's really important to know that it's the decade of action. Climate change is really urgent. It's time to start now, and it's wonderful if brands want to incorporate carbon-friendly fibers into their supply chain. We have enough knowledge to act. There are gaps for sure, but it's enough information and expertise out there to start. And yeah, I would say start with the identification of the hotspots in your specific fiber and materials portfolio. Identify what the biggest levers are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, set science-based targets, make metric-based decisions wherever possible, embed your fiber and material strategy into a broader sustainability strategy. Join multi-stakeholder initiatives, as we can achieve much more together than what we can achieve as individuals. And if you don't know, for example, our corporate fiber and materials benchmark program yet, I think explore it. It's a tool to help companies holistically assess their overall fiber and materials portfolio to identify hotspots, compare your progress with the peers. It helps to answer the question whether a company's progress is fast enough. And that's really crucial, as we can't afford to wait any longer, but we must accelerate the uptake of preferred fibers and materials.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bruce, we've heard criticism about carbon offsets as a way for companies to pay to pollute. How much truth is there to that statement? And do offsets have a role to play in a hierarchy of mitigation? I know our other panelists will probably have things to say as well, because they use offsets as part of their strategy.
I hope so, because full disclosure, I don't know a lot about offsets. I think they're reasonable for some essential industries like, public utilities who want to do their part in fighting climate change, but don't have the technology yet in place to achieve the kind of reductions. So, for US cotton, we're focused on, again, reduction and then sequestration of the cotton in the soil. So again, I'm going to leave it to the other experts here to talk more about offsets, because it sounds like Trisha's already been doing some of that.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, I think there's no way that we can have no carbon. So you have to be responsible. And as we keep saying, reduction is key. And I think this goes back to asking the right questions. Has has the company you're working with done enough to first have those reductions, challenge their suppliers, and then look at offsets, and that should be the hierarchy. And we can be as responsible as possible. I mean, for us at Lenzing, how do we manage moving trees around? Things like that just can't be done on bicycles. So you are going to have some carbon related to certain aspects like transportation, but minimizing as much as possible the offsets. It shouldn't be 100% through offsets. And that's where people have to question what is realistic.
Jay or Sophia, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I would say from an offset standpoint, particularly in the manufacturing business, when there is a process or a product that it is the technology is not there yet, or it's unachievable to obtain a certain lower carbon or carbon neutral position, then certainly it's a positive thing if you're investing in something that is a positive for the environment and does pay back to some degree. However, as Tricia alluded to, it still has to be a focus on whatever the process you have that is not environmentally friendly, and how can you work to develop a technology or improve a process that would have a positive impact or a lower impact on your carbon emissions.
Yes, I agree. I think in general, it is important to put a price on carbon emissions. Somebody has to pay for pollution, be it carbon emissions or any other impacts. And this should not be the society, the poorest, that will be the most affected by climate change or future generations. The polluter pays principle should apply. So if you can't avoid emissions, you should at least pay for them. But this is a very important point. There is certainly a hierarchy of mitigation, and first and foremost, companies should reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions in their own operations, but particularly also in their supply chains. This is sometimes also called carbon insetting. And so carbon offsetting is the last resort to compensate the unavoidable emissions, I would say.
Would any of you say that carbon washing, just like greenwashing, might be a problem, or a burgeoning problem?
I definitely think that that's an issue. And we have to look at, the progress and over perfection and what can be done. I think there's good examples of some brands that have been able to communicate, where their footprint is and do that in a very transparent way. Like Allbirds, they do that in labeling their shoes. They work with us on the tree runner. So I think that's a good example. And it avoids the carbon washing because they're stating what the facts are. And they're also giving that choice to the consumer. What is your value behind what you're buying? Are you aligning with what the company is, stating? And allowing the consumer then to make that choice and put their dollars behind what they believe in.
Yeah, wonderful. So again, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And if you see a question that you really want to prioritize us answering, you can upvote them. So I think we can start with some of the questions. We have about 34 questions and one with like 10 upvotes. I think it's a question for Sophia. Is the industry looking into hemp and linen or blends like that? And if not, why not?
Yes, the industry is looking into hemp and linens, and it's at the moment the market share is rather low. So I think that's the reason why it's not one of the priority materials that is often discussed. But I think it's important to look at these different fibers and materials that are also less known. And I mentioned the innovation gap. And I think, linen and hemp, if they are produced in a carbon-friendly way and also processed in a carbon-friendly way, they can offer pretty interesting solutions in order to close this carbon innovation gap.
So here's a question for Jay with 11 upvotes. Given that the ultimate goal should be to get out of fossil fuels entirely, does REPREVE have a long-term goal to shift into another material, example, bio-based polymers, and what does that timeline look like?
Yeah, you know, there's a tremendous amount of work that's happening behind the scenes right now, particularly in the petrochemical market. So I do think over the next 12 to 18 months, you will see some advancements for lower carbon or carbon neutral virgin material that will be addressed in the marketplace as this technology starts to commercialize from that perspective. But also bio-PET is certainly something that most synthetic fiber manufacturers are exploring. It's not quite from a availability and a commercial standpoint. The product is out there today, but it is just not where it needs to be when you compare that to recycled material availability and the effort to divert synthetic material from the landfill. So I think these things will emerge over time. I would definitely expect you to see some activity and some lower carbon commitments and statements come out over the next 18 months when it comes to the petrochemicals that are out there to make synthetic material.
I think this is a question that can be directed at all our panelists. Is reduced production and consumption part of your strategy to achieving your targets?
I mean, from our side, I think I've already made that clear, and we can share that information. You can also find out more information on tencel.com. There we have a whole section on true carbon zero.
Hey, Jasmine, is that question meaning less consumption, meaning fewer garments?
Fewer garments, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, I thought so. Wow, that's an interesting one. You know, since we're all in the business to make money and sell more, that's a tough one. That would mean that somebody, you know, has to increase their share in order to win if, you know, the total global consumption goes down. I do think we need a lot more work around circularity and recycled and keeping garments and products around a lot longer and not just discard, discard, discard. So I think that's got to be part of the whole conversation around fashion, because even though, again, you have to, right? It's a problem.
Yeah, I think you're right, Bruce. You know, in the fashion industry, the apparel industry today, we're in the early stages of designing for reuse. And so over the next 5-10 years, I think we're going to see a major shift in recycling and circularity. We're going to have to go beyond the bottle, as we like to say at Unify, because the bottle is something that the consumer easily identifies with. Depending on where you are in the world, it's readily available to some degree. However, it does come for reduction. It's going to come down to reusing apparel, which you're seeing with some companies like ThreadUp and some other companies that are out there that are doing that. But there's so much waste that is out there. So as the recycling technology improves, we're going to be able to utilize different materials, separate different fibers, and hopefully ultimately recycle that material back into yarn and fiber and back into fabric for the fabric industry.
Yeah, I just to address the consumption side, I agree with the other panelists. You know, it's around this hierarchy of circularity, reduce, reuse, recycle. And we see many innovative business models that continue to expand or develop, especially during this time. For Lenzing, we have a circularity product with textile to textile circularity, where we are upcycling spent textiles that are cotton-based, and that is called our REPREVE technology. So we are looking at the reuse side and being able to recycle. I think overall, though, when you look at it, population growth, and you also have other end-use applications. So if we look at that total pie of fibers, 105 million tons to 110 million tons a year, 50 million tons is being discarded annually globally. So where are we going to reduce that waste? And this could be a whole other conversation just on carbon, greenhouse gases, with anything related to textile recycling and recycling with apparel. But I think overall as an industry, we all agree that there has to be the reduction, quality of materials, keeping garments in use longer. But with that, we also know that there's other new market opportunities too.
Yeah, one other note on that, Tricia, to your point, sometimes you think you're doing the right thing with circularity and converting old garments back into fiber to be reused. And in fact, all you're doing is creating more carbon, and greenhouse gases, using more energy. So this is all connected and very complicated, I think.
It is all connected, and where is the waste? Where is the collection, sorting, processing to bring it back into the supply chain? So yeah, very complex.
Yeah, definitely agree. So we have a question about, can Unify recycle PET garments? And I would like to maybe broaden that and say, what mechanisms do we have in place to recycle the recycled materials?
Yeah, I mean, there are a variety of companies out there today that can recycle a variety of materials. At Unify, we have a product and a process we call textile take back, and we do have programs where we are bringing different forms of fabric waste, whether it comes off the cutting tables or whether it's just from a product assembly waste and so forth. That we can bring back and we can reprocess and convert that into polymer and re-extrude that into filament or staple fiber material. There's some limitations with that today with the current technology, but I do believe you're going to see improvements, and I think you're going to be able to more product will be available as the technology improves. And so that's the challenge that Unify has, and some other synthetic manufacturers out there is investing in the right technology that gives you the capability to take materials back. Right now, there's not a lot of separation technology out there, as far as there's a tremendous amount of polyspandex in the market. There's a tremendous amount of polycotton and so forth that can be difficult to recycle, but the advancements are being made year over year. And I think, remember, sustainability is a journey. And if we think back to where we were 5-10 years ago, look at how far we've come. And I think we can expect to see that us to continue down that path and advance at a much faster rate as the industry gets focused on sustainability.
So here's a question for Tricia. What resources did you need to get to your science-based targets and measure all your scope emissions? Would you have any advice for small, medium firms looking to do the same, but with little resources?
Yeah, this goes back to, I'm on the business development and marketing side. So I would be happy if that person wanted to reach out to me and I could connect them with the team, because this is where at our headquarters, we have the specialists who, are LCA specialists and understand this information. And I do know that when we were working on our science-based targets, we did talk a lot with other companies who had approved science-based targets or were in action, especially our brand partners. So more than happy if the person wants to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I can connect them with the right person to give them more information.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. This is from Lauren. As a fashion design professor, updating fashion curriculum to reflect sustainable practices in design and production. Oh, that's what she does. Oh, wait, where did the story go? Where did the question go? Our students struggle with being able to source sustainable textiles for their designs due to large volume order minimums. Are you willing to work with our design schools and student designers? They are our future.
I'm happy to start with that. I strongly believe, and so does our team, that we do support small designers as well as students. We're involved in several different programs. Last week we just presented on Transformers Ed, which is giving an education platform to students. They can find more information. Again, you can contact me, or you can find it actually on Carved in Blue. As far as working with small minimums, we do put together a list of suppliers that have smaller minimums. And I think Kendor, who's a sponsor of these talks, is a wonderful supplier to reach out to. We have some others around the world. And also there's many digital platforms that are developing now with dead stock fabric, which I think is a great alternative. Queen of Raw being one of them, Semzen B. Again, feel free to reach out to us. We have those resources put together to at least help you get to the next step.
Jay, Bruce, or Sophia, did you want to add anything else?
I think certainly we want to support particularly the designers out there, because those are the ones that will initiate the change the fastest. And certainly we want to support them in any ways we can. And obviously we're aware, as Tricia alluded to, we're aware, every small business has the same challenge when it comes to working with large manufacturers and the minimums associated with that. But from an educational standpoint and program support, I'm sure every one of the panelists here are doing work in that areas and supporting education and sustainability in their different industries.
Short answer is yes. Every big business started as a small business. So love to help.
Back to you, Kelly.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you to our incredible panel, and thanks again to Lenzing for sponsoring this discussion. We've learned a ton from each of you, and it's very clear this is a complex discussion, and we could have actually made the session 2 hours, I'm sure. As Jay said, sustainability is a journey, and we all need to do what we can. Nobody is perfect, but progress is being made. I learned a ton from you all today. I know there were so many questions, so if any of your questions weren't answered, feel free to email us at where@fashiontakesaction.com. The webinar has been recorded as well, and then it will be shared. I know some of you were asking about slides and things like that, so no worries, we'll be sharing it with you. And yeah, so thanks again. And next up at noon, we have a presentation by Kendor Textiles and Ethical Profiling Limited on driving change through sustainable sourcing. So we hope that you'll join us back in an hour for that. And then immediately following that at 1:00 p.m. Eastern is a look at fabrics of the future with Fashion for Good. So thanks again, everybody, for being here with us and from all the different time zones. And I look forward to keeping this discussion going with you all.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.